I invite you to remain standing for our scripture reading. We'll be reading from the book of John, chapter 4. Let's read God's good word together. A Samaritan woman came to draw water, and Jesus said to her, "Give me a drink." His disciples had gone to the city to buy food. The Samaritan woman said to him, "How is it that you, a Jew, ask a drink of me, a woman of Samaria? Jews do not share things in common with Samaritans." Jesus answered her, "If you knew the gift of God and who it is that is saying to you, 'Give me a drink,' you would have asked him, and he would have given you living water." This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. You may be seated.
During election season, it seems division and polarization are common headlines. In a time filled with negativity, we have a choice to make. Choosing kindness isn't about avoiding our differences, but navigating them with respect and compassion. Kindness has the power to influence even more than an election. It strengthens relationships, neighborhoods, and communities. It helps us find common ground instead of taking sides. It allows us to disagree and remain friends. It builds bridges instead of walls. Let's vote for kindness, one small act at a time.
A few years I was talking to someone and we were having a conversation, and she was telling me about something that had happened. Someone else had done something that really upset her, and so she was just telling me all about it and how mad she was at this other person and just really kind of laying into her. And so I let her go on for a little bit, and then finally I asked, "Have you talked to her about it?" And she said, "Well, no, that would be mean." And so I said something like, "Okay." And what I wish I'd had the clarity and the courage to say was, what you are doing now is actually mean, right? I mean, have you ever been in that situation where you don't want to say something because it's mean, and so you're telling someone else about how awful that person was because of what they did to you, and then you realize, or maybe you don't realize, most of us don't realize most of the time, that's actually not kind. And actually there's a difference between meanness and kindness. And or between me, obviously there's a difference between meanness and kindness. Anyway, that's it, we're done. There's a difference between niceness and kindness. And yet sometimes we get those things mixed up. And so that's what we're going to talk about today. And we're in the midst of 50 days of kindness. And today we're talking about the difference between niceness and kindness. And I think it's helpful the way that Arthur Brooks puts it. He says, kindness and niceness, though both excellent personal qualities, are not the same thing. The former, kindness, is to be good to others. The latter, niceness, is about being pleasant. It's about etiquette and politeness. And so two different things, neither one's bad, both are important, but not the same. And yet we get them mixed up. And so you may even have been in a situation where someone has not been particularly nice, but they've been kind. And Brooks says that you can go to certain parts of the country and people will see that you have a flat tire and say, "You have a flat tire, you moron, give me the jack." And then they will help you. And you'll go to other parts of the country and people say, "Oh, you've got a flat tire, have a nice day." And they will not help you. Which one is kind? Now, we might have a word with the first person about kind words, like it's best. The great thing about Oklahoma is a lot of times you get both, right? Kind and nice. Not always, but a lot of times. And yet they're not the same thing. And so we're talking about kindness because the U.S. presidential election is less than 50 days away. And there is so much kindness going on and coming out of the political ads. And everybody on Twitter is just, X. They're being so kind right now, so we just want to add to, okay, no, it's not. It's not a particularly kind state of discourse in our country, and so we want to be a part of a change to that, a part of actually bringing kindness into our community, into our culture, into our nation, because it's particularly lacking. And kindness is something that we read a lot about in the Bible. It's really throughout it. Last week, Pastor Mark told us about where what we can learn about it from the prophet Micah, and what he taught us is that kindness, which that comes from the Hebrew word hesed, it has to do with love and with loyalty and with faithfulness. And so it's a lot bigger concept than just niceness. Niceness is not a bad thing, but it's not the same as kindness. And so kindness is a lot bigger, particularly as we read that concept in the Old Testament. In fact, some translations will even translate it loving kindness, just as one word, loving kindness. And yet this thing that we kind of often treat as being fairly quaint has the power to change the world. Kindness has the power to change the world. And if somebody has done a particularly kind act for you at a time when you were in need, you know how that can change things because it changed your world. Maybe you've experienced that. And so we can be a part of that for other people. But we also get it confused with niceness. And it's one of those things that, one of the earliest rules that we learn is to be nice to others, right? Did anybody learn that whenever you were young? I mean, I hope so. I've tried to teach my daughters that, and we are working on it. They do pretty well most of the time. My 9-year-old has please and thank you down. My 3-year-old can get a little demanding. She does not, without a reminder. Then we can get it usually, unless she's really hungry, and then, all bets are off. But most of the time, we can get there. But it's something that we try to do. We try to be nice. A lot of us like to think of ourselves as nice. In fact, one study found that 98% of people think that they're nicer than 50% of the population. So I'll give you a second to think about that math. It doesn't work. 48% of people are deluded. And so probably not surprising to you, right? But the good thing is all of us are in that top 50%, right? Right. And all of the kids are above average. It's just like Lake Wobegon. And so all good. But we think of ourselves as nice. And here's the thing. You can be nice without being kind. You can be nice without being kind. And so maybe you've been in that situation and you're in a group of people and someone is just talking bad about someone else. And then someone else walks up, right? Has that ever happened to you? And how do they usually act towards someone else? Hey, how's it going? It's so good to see you. You doing all right? Things good? Wow, you're just so great. I'm so glad. Look at you. I'm so glad that you're here, right? And it's just like, how long have you been here, by the way? You just got great. You didn't hear anything I said. Awesome. That's what I was just talking about you. All good things, right? I mean, you've experienced that. And then what happens whenever they leave? Gosh, I thought they would never leave. Right? I mean, we do these things, we act nice to people's face, and then whenever they go, we're free to tell the truth as we see it and not act particularly kindly. And here's the thing, that niceness and kindness perfectly compatible, but niceness without kindness can become dishonest. It can be a way of just kind of putting on a mask, putting on a facade, and hiding behind that, and not actually being kind to other people. And maybe you've experienced, sometimes this can happen, and whenever you put up niceness like a shield, and the greatest lie, I think, that's ever been told in the name of niceness, it's fine, right? It's all good. And you learn eventually in relationships that whenever you hear that, it is not fine, right? And so if you didn't know that, you got to dig a little deeper, and or maybe you need to back off a little bit. Anyway, I probably shouldn't give relationship advice around that. Anyway, a lot of times it's fine does not mean it's fine. Sometimes the tone tells you that, but we like to say that. But we don't want to say how it really is because that could be mean. That could seem like we're being mean. And it can also become a way that we try to control the way that we're perceived. Niceness can be a way that I like to think of myself as nice, and I want you to think that of me too. I am so nice, by the way. And so I act nice, and that way I can get you to think about me the way I want you to think about me. It might even be that I need to think of myself as nice, and so I act that way because I need to keep thinking that way about myself. And here's the thing that maybe you've experienced. Sometimes we reduce Christianity to niceness, right? Oh, go to church on Sundays and be nice to people, and that's it. And that's a great start, right? I'm not saying here's the thing, don't walk out of here and say, well, pastor said don't be nice, so I don't have to be polite to anybody. That's not what we're talking about. But it's so much more than that. That's not what the faith is about. That is just an empty faith that will just drag you down. It will not help you. And so I think we really need to get clear on what is kindness, really, and what is it not. And so as we've been saying, kindness is not the same as niceness. It's not. They're just two different things. It's also not an excuse for meanness, though, right? Well, I'm being polite, but I'm actually lying, and so I'm just going to start telling the truth. I'm going to tell this person exactly what I think of them in excruciating detail because that's the kind thing to do. That is not the kind thing to do, right? It doesn't just mean you get to be mean to everyone. And if we're really honest during political season, a lot of times when we say, I like people because they just tell it how it is, what they're actually telling is saying mean things about people that I don't like, right? I mean, too often we celebrate that. It's not worth celebrating. So kindness is not an excuse for meanness. It's also not pretending. It's not acting like I think that you're great whenever I don't, or pretending like everything is good whenever it's not, or hey, we agree on everything. And that gets us to our next one. It's not denying disagreement. I mean, if we want to actually have real relationships with people, we've got to acknowledge that we think differently. That the things that you like aren't necessarily the things that I like. If we want to do better in our national discourse, we have to acknowledge, like, we're not going to agree on everything. We may not even agree on most things. Hopefully we agree on the most important things, but we've got to have the conversation first to figure that out. And we have to actually acknowledge who we are and where we're coming from if we want to be able to have that conversation. And so that's really what kindness is not. One of the things that I think really can help us to learn about kindness is the story of Jesus as he meets the woman in the well, at the well. She was not in the well. The woman at the well in Samaria. And so they have this conversation, and Jesus had been in Jerusalem, and he was traveling back to Galilee and went through Samaria. And while he was traveling, he asked a woman for a drink, and this is how it went. A Samaritan woman came to draw water, and Jesus said to her, "Give me a drink." His disciples had gone to the city to buy food. It was just the two of them. The Samaritan woman said to him, "How is it that you, a Jew, ask a drink of me, a woman of Samaria? Jews do not share things in common with Samaritans." And so he was walking through, and there's a woman who was at the well getting water, and he went and asked her for a drink. He was probably not traveling with his own bucket, and so he needed someone to get water for him. And so he asked her. But as she notes, this was not an ordinary conversation. This was not the polite conversation that you would have. Because if you are a nice Jewish man, you do not walk up to a Samaritan and just strike up a conversation. They did not get along. In fact, there was a lot of history. They had been at war about 150 years earlier, and had come through a lot from how deep into the weeds do I want to go? So basically, if you were a Samaritan, you had what we think of as the first 5 books of the Bible, the book of the law, and that was it, and that's all you needed. And if you were a Jew, you had all of what we call the Old Testament, the Torah, or the Tanakh, and you had all of these other books. And so, right, if you were over here, you were like, they're missing like 2/3 of the Bible, and how are they supposed to know who God is? And then if you're over here, they're like, they added all of these books that we do not even have. Like, what are they trying to do? They also worshipped in different places. And so if you were Jewish, you probably know there was a temple in Jerusalem, and that was the place where you go to worship. If you were a Samaritan, you go to Mount Gerizim, and that's the place that you worship. And so they had all of these really different ideas and a lot of cultural history. It comes back to whenever there was the northern kingdom of Israel and the southern kingdom of Judah, and the Assyrians came in and conquered Israel. And anyway, again, we don't have to get into that, but there was a lot of bad blood. And really the enmity between them, there's not a good parallel for that in American culture. I mean, even talking about Republicans and Democrats today does not hold a candle to the kind of conflict that was going on there. So this was a serious boundary that he was crossing. Not only that, but if you're a nice Jewish man, you do not approach a woman that you don't know and ask her for something. And so there are these two significant boundaries that he is crossing that would not have seen. If polite society was watching, they would have said, this is not a nice thing that is happening. He should not be talking to her for multiple reasons. And yet he approaches her and asks her for help, asks her to give something to him. And in return, he offers her living water. And so he answered her. If she says, why are you talking to me like we're not supposed to be talking? And he says, if you knew the gift of God and who it is that is saying to you, give me a drink, you would have asked him, and he would have given you living water. The woman said to him, "Sir, you have no bucket, and the well is deep." And so she's taking what he said at a literal level, like, Jesus, like, how are you going to... Do you see the water down there? I don't think your arm is long enough to like reach in. And where's this living water coming from? Where do you get that living water? Are you greater than our ancestor Jacob? Dramatic irony. Yes, he is greater than Jacob. Who gave us the well, and with his sons and his flocks drank from it? And so she's, asking these questions and trying to figure out what is going on with this guy. And so he continues, everyone who drinks of this water will be thirsty again, the water of the well, but those who drink of the water that I give them will never be thirsty. The water that I will give will become in them a spring of water gushing up to eternal life. The woman said to him, "Sir, give me this water so that I may never be thirsty or have to keep coming here to draw water." And so she's still taking this at a literal level, like, oh, this is like some kind of magic water that you drink and you're never thirsty again, right? I don't have to worry about getting my 64 ounces a day anymore. I don't have to carry, that ridiculous water bottle around that I've got, as someone who has several ridiculous water bottles, not throwing stones. But so she doesn't quite get it yet, but she's interested in what she has. There's a relationship that's being formed, and she's saying, okay, I don't think that we're supposed to be talking, but you've got my attention, so let's continue talking. And whenever she does that, she also acknowledges their differences. She is not just like, hey, we're friends now, we're great, everything is the same, and we're just going to pretend like everything's good from now on, and all of these other things we're just never going to talk about again. I'm going to pretend like I'm Jewish, and you pretend like you're Samaritan, and it'll all be great. That's not what happens. And so this is what she says. She brings up like, hey, our ancestors worshipped on this mountain, but you Jews say that the place where people must worship is in Jerusalem. And so she actually acknowledges like, okay, I don't know how this is going to work because you're offering me this living water, but I think if I show up in Jerusalem, I will probably not be welcome. And if you try to come worship here, you will probably not be welcome. And so how are we going to do this? And in doing that, she's really leaning into the conversation. A lot of times we're pretty good today at whenever we're having a conversation about difference, of just pretending like it's okay and ignoring it, Okay, we're just going to file this under the 18 things that you and I don't talk about so that we can continue being nice to each other. Just set it over here and we'll both politely pretend like we can't see it anymore. The other thing that we do is like we just take it head on and we yell at them, or we just run away from the conversation and end the relationship. And she doesn't do either one. She leans into it and says, okay, we have to figure out how we're going to resolve this if we're going to be in a relationship. How are we going to do that? Like, can we worship together? I don't know how we're going to. She actually acknowledges the problem and leans into working together to solve it. It's also interesting, whenever she's talking about worshiping and where we worship, and yet she doesn't talk about who we worship, which is kind of more important than where, right? I mean, who are we? And I think, isn't that the thing? Whenever we get in these disagreements, we get so focused on the things that we disagree about that we forget about the things that are actually more important. Anyway, maybe something for us to take note of. But she's leaning into the conversation and asking, how are we going to do this? How can I actually be a part of what you are offering whenever I'm not welcome at the temple in Jerusalem? And so what Jesus tells her is he tells her the truth about himself. He offers himself to her as the Savior. And so this is what he said. He says, the hour is coming, and now here, when the true worshipers will worship the Father where? In spirit and truth, not in a physical place, but in the power of the Spirit and in truth. For the Father seeks such as these to worship him. God is spirit, and those who worship him must worship in spirit and in truth. Jesus is not worried about where people worship. He's worried about who and how they worship. And so basically what he's saying is, it doesn't matter if you're a woman, it doesn't matter if you're a Samaritan, it doesn't matter if you're Jewish. If you worship the Father in spirit and in truth, you are welcome in his family. You are a part of what I'm doing. And so she says to him, I know that the Messiah is coming, who is called Christ. When he comes, he will proclaim all things to us. And Jesus said to her, I am he, the one who is speaking to you. He offers himself to her. Now, the Messiah was not supposed to come to a Samaritan woman. Like, he was supposed to come like to Jerusalem and announce himself at the temple or something like that, not stop by a well and make small talk with a Samaritan woman. And by the way, I'm the Messiah. You want in? Like, you want to be a part of what God is doing? Citizenship in the kingdom of God. Here you go. Like, no prereqs. You're in. And yet that's what Jesus did. He in kindness stepped across multiple boundaries to offer life to her. And through his kindness and her courage, because if people saw her talking to a strange Jewish man that nobody knew, are they going to treat that nicely? Like, I'm sure she's just being helpful. No, rumors are going to start. And yet she had the courage to stay in the conversation. Because of that, many Samaritans came to believe in Jesus. She went and told them, and they came to see. And he stayed there for 2 days with his disciples and taught them about himself. And here's the thing. I know we think our differences in the U.S. are pretty irreconcilable, right? But I'm thinking if people who were literally killing each other can come together, if kindness can connect a first century Jew and a first century Samaritan, it just might be able to connect us today, right? Are you with me? Okay, I don't see anybody walking toward the door. So if you have to go to the bathroom, that's okay though. But so here's what kindness can bridge those gaps whenever we're willing to have the courage to do that together. And so, but kindness requires something of us. It's being nice is easy, but kindness is hard. And there are things that kindness requires. One of the things that it requires is honesty. If we're going to have a real relationship, I have to be honest with you. I have to be honest about the things that are important to me, and I can't just pretend like they're okay. And sometimes that leads to hard conversations. And yet, if we want to actually have real relationships, we have to be willing to enter in those. And, whenever Jesus talks about this, he says, whenever you're talking to people, just say yes and no. When you manipulate words to get your own way, you go wrong. And I think, a lot of times we have great intentions, but we're essentially manipulating our words to try to keep the peace. And yet it's not a real peace. And in fact, we have some great wisdom from this that comes out of the monastic tradition. If you join a monastery and you don't like your roommate, the answer is not, okay, we'll move you to another monastery and it'll just be okay. They're like, you took a vow of stability. Like, you just have to stay and figure it out, And so it's not like today where you can just go. They actually had to figure it out. And so they've got great wisdom for how do we actually live together. And if you look at the rule of St. Benedict, which has guided monastic communities for more than 1,000 years, this is part of what it says. Your way of acting should be different from the world's way. The love of Christ must come before all else. That's a pretty good line, right? I mean, maybe if you claim the name of Christian and you run for office, you ought to take this up. And anyway, just an idea. You are not to act in anger or nurse a grudge. Rid your heart of all deceit. Never give a hollow greeting of peace or turn away when someone needs your love. I think that hollow greeting of peace, I think that's something we do. Other translators talk about it as giving false peace. Just saying, hey, everything's okay, whenever it's not. Or, whenever somebody is walking all over you saying, oh, it's fine, just keep going. Or whenever you see somebody else who's getting walked on, not saying anything because you don't want to hurt the person's feelings who's doing the walking, right? We're just like, oh, it's okay. We don't want to disturb the peace. We give these hollow greetings of peace. And yet if we're really going to live in kindness, if we're going to be kind to one another, if we're going to be kind to others, we have to be willing to disturb the peace in order to be honest. And here's the hard thing about kindness and telling the truth. It may not always feel nice, right? But you've probably had people who have said the nice thing instead of the true thing. And whenever you figure that out, that doesn't feel very nice either, right? It's like, I wish you would have just told me instead of pretending. And if you look at the scriptures, you see some people who are saying some things that are not nice and yet that need to be said. You brood of vipers, John the Baptist. How many friends do you make whenever you greet people that way, right? I haven't tried it, but I'm guessing not a lot. We talk about John the Baptist at Advent going into Christmas time, and there are actually Christmas cards with John the Baptist. Think about it. Maybe your family, maybe not. Please don't, unless someone was sitting next to you in the sermon today and you think they might appreciate it. But, John the Baptist says some hard things, and it's not because he's trying to condemn people. It's actually because he's trying to help them. He's trying to help them see that the things they are doing are actually, they're like snakes that are biting people. He's trying to help them stop. And we see this in Jesus' words as well. There were some things that if he asked me before he said them, he didn't. So, but if he did, I'd like to say, Jesus, maybe we could just polish that a little. That's pretty good. Maybe we could just say it a little bit nicer. He did not. And if I did tell him that, he might say, get behind me, Satan. So I don't, but he said some things like when the rich young ruler came and talked to him, what he said was, there's one thing lacking, sell all that you own and distribute the money to the poor, and you'll have treasure in heaven. Then come follow me. Do you know what would be nicer is to say, try not to care about your possessions quite as much and come follow me. That's not what he says. He says he recognizes that for this particular person, we talk about this sometimes, this is not a universal teaching, but for this particular person, what he really needed to do was to sell his possessions because they had a hold of his heart. And yet that was not welcome news to him. He went away sad, for he had great many possessions. And I'm guessing if I told you all that you would not be particularly happy with me either. I would not be particularly happy if someone said that to me. I wouldn't do it. But he says these things because he needed to hear them. Or whenever he teaches, Jesus said, enter through the narrow gate, for the gate is wide and the road is easy that leads where? to destruction. Like, that doesn't sound nice. And there are many who take it. For the gate is narrow and the road is hard that leads to what? To life. Now, I would rather have, Jesus, can I take a little of column A and a little bit of column B? Like, I'd like the easy road, but I'd like for the destination to be life, right? And yet we know that the way of Jesus is the way to life, and it is not easy. It's not. And so he doesn't do us any favors by telling us otherwise. Yeah, it's fine. I mean, just do whatever you want and you'll probably be okay. Like, that's not what he says, because it would be unkind. It would be unkind for him not to be truthful. I was actually thinking about how, basically you see other great spiritual teachers who will tell things the way they are and not necessarily be nice about them. And I don't know if you remember The Empire Strikes Back, but Yoda didn't even tell Luke who he was until like halfway through the movie. Like, polite people introduce themselves on first reference. Come on, Yoda. And whenever Luke was trying to get the X-Wing up out of the swamp, Yoda did not say, like, hey, great attempt, you'll get it next time. What did he say? That is why you fail. Like, thank you, Yoda. I'm very motivated to try again right now. And yet that's what Luke needed. And maybe Yoda's not the exemplar that we need. But here's the thing. Jesus told the truth. He told people what they needed to hear, and it didn't always seem like the nice thing, and yet it was much kinder to tell them the true thing than the thing that they would have wanted to hear. That's what all of us need to hear. We need to hear the thing that, well, we need to hear, and not a polite lie that makes us feel better. Here's the other part of that, though. We need to tell the truth. We also don't need to tell everything that we've ever thought. So, if you're having a hard conversation with someone about something you disagree about, you can say, actually, I see that a little bit differently. You don't have to say, actually, I see that a little bit differently, and here's why you're wrong, and here's why everything that you think is so dumb, and I can't believe anybody would think, right? You can stop. You can say, actually, I see that differently, period. That's a great sentence. And so you don't have to tell everyone everything that you think. It's, sometimes we mix up truth-telling with just kind of letting them have it, and they aren't the same thing. And so Dr. Meg Wheatley puts it this way. She says, it's kind to be present, it's kind to be open and curious, it's kind to be respectful, and it is a great kindness to keep our judgments, biases, and opinions to ourselves, to refrain from inserting them into the work or allowing them to distort our relationships. Now, there are times that we need to share things, but sharing all of our judgments is not going to help anybody. Right? Here are all the things that I've judged about you in the last week. Nope. Too much, and that's not even necessarily truth. That's just opinion. And so we've got to figure that out. And here's the hard thing. I in almost every situation, I know what the polite thing to do is. I know what the nice thing to do is. I may or may not choose it. I don't have a 100% success rate, but I generally know what it is. Kindness is hard. Kindness requires discernment. There are a lot of situations where I don't necessarily know what the kind thing is. And I know that we need to have this hard conversation. I don't know how much I need to share with you. I've got to figure that out. And partially for that reason, kindness also requires courage. It took a lot of courage for that woman to have a conversation with a strange Jewish man who just approached her out of nowhere. And then to continue to hang in and this guy clearly knows some stuff, but I've still got a question, and it would be easier to just pretend like it's all good and we'll figure it out later, but I'm going to ask. And yet she did that. And kindness requires courage of each one of us, because things do not get better if we just turn our head the other way, because it would be impolite, because saying something wouldn't feel nice. We have to choose kindness, and it's hard. And yet the reason that we choose kindness is because God was first kind to us. Because kindness is who God is. That is who God is. And we're kind because God's kindness to us never ends. And if you've taken Disciple Bible Study, you've gone through the Old Testament, and you're like, okay, the people God saved the people, and maybe they're just going to get it right this time, and they're not going to nope, they turned away again. They did it again. And it's just again and again and again. And it's easy to condemn until we realize that that's a mirror of our own lives, right? I mean, each of us, we turn away again and again and again, and yet God continues to welcome us back with open arms, right? I mean, just like the parable of the prodigal son runs to us and welcomes us. And we see this throughout Jesus' life. Clearly, we see kindness in Jesus' encounter with the woman at the well. We also see it whenever he's hanging from the cross. Right? Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they are doing. Meanwhile, they're gambling over his clothing. He's like, they don't know what they're doing. Here's the thing. That's like, I've been told to assume the best before. That's like next level assuming the best, right? They're actively killing me, and yet I'm offering forgiveness to them. That's probably more kindness than any of us have in us yet. And yet that's what he calls to us. That's what he calls us to. That's the example that he sets and what he's inviting us to grow toward, to that kind of kindness. And it's a kindness that transcends nationality and culture. God's kindness is for everyone. It's not just for Samaritans. It's not just for Jews. It's not just for men. It's not just for women. I don't know if you knew this. God is kind to Democrats and Republicans alike. Well, hold on to your seats, I know. And also libertarians and also people who are part of political parties that are obscure enough that you've never heard of them. God's kindness is for everyone. This is what Jesus says in Matthew chapter 5. I say to you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you, so that you may be children of your Father in heaven. For he makes the sun rise on the evil and on the good. I'll let you figure out who's who. I'm not getting into that. And sends rain on the righteous and on the unrighteous. The rain that we got today, guess what? Democrats got it. Republicans got it. People who are in church got it. People who are not in church got it. God's kindness is for everyone, for all of us. And here's the thing, whenever we live out the kindness of God, when we embody that and invite people into it, our kindness can create a world in which people who are nothing alike, who may disagree about everything, are becoming family through the kindness of God. One of the really cool things, whenever I got here, about 6 years ago, I started working at Acts 2, and it was during the midterm elections. We actually had two people who were running for state office in our church. And guess what? One was a Republican and one was a Democrat. And they went to church together. So you know which one we prayed for. Both of them, right? I mean, they stood next to each other and our entire congregation prayed over both of them. And they were friends. And they did not pretend like they agreed on every single thing. And yet they were able to be kind to each other. Do you know how many spaces there are in American life right now where people can come together who see things differently and can actually have a peaceful and productive community? Do you know that you might be sitting next to a Democrat right now? You might be sitting next to a Republican right now. And that's a beautiful thing about our community, because ultimately it's not about our politics, it's about Jesus. And that's what unites all of us. That's better than all the other things. And because of him, we don't have to pretend like we agree on every single thing. And yet God is working through and in spite of our differences to create a family. And we have the opportunity to take that out into our community as well. And so here are the action steps I want to challenge you to take. Each day in the 50 days of kindness, we're challenging you to do a different act of kindness. And so here are this week's challenges. It's Sunday. It's almost noon. And so granted, you've lost half the day already. So this one's easy. Pick up a piece of trash in a public place. You can nail this one before you get to the car, right? You might also go somewhere else, a park or in your neighborhood or your neighbor's yard or one of the schools next door. But pick up some trash. Then tomorrow, Mondays can be hard. Some people really don't look forward to them. So on your way to work or to school or wherever you're going, pick up coffee for somebody else or pick up another drink. Maybe if you know they don't like coffee, then maybe don't get them coffee, but get somebody a drink, just an act of kindness to help them start the day. On Tuesday, whenever you talk to someone, ask someone an open-ended question and listen without distraction. Actually take the time to get to know someone better and then pay attention. Asking the question and then not paying attention does not feel kind. And so you got to do both. But actually give someone the gift of your attention. All right, the next, we're ascending in difficulty. And so the next one's a little bit tough. But if you run into someone who's going through a hard time, actually offer to pray out loud for them. I know it's easy for me to say because it's my job to do that with people, but I know I've had people who have told me that they're praying for me, and that's wonderful and meaningful. And when people actually hear people praying for me, it makes such a difference. And so I did it on a Wednesday, so if you're at youth or you're with your small group, you'll at least have that opportunity. That might make it easier. But that can be a family member, it can be somebody at work. If you're with someone who's going through a hard time, don't just tell them you're praying for them, but actually pray with them. And it doesn't have to be long. It can be, God, I lift up Brandon to you. Help him to finish this sermon before it gets too much later. Amen. A couple sentences is all it takes, and yet it makes such a difference whenever people are willing to actually pray for you. And so try that one. That's one of the tougher ones. Then on Thursday, we're coming back to the distraction thing again. I want you to put away or turn off your phone or smartwatch while you're talking to someone, because nothing says I care about what you're saying. What? Right? And it doesn't even count. I was pretending like I got a text on my watch. It's actually, this is a 10-year-old Garmin watch that does not receive text, if you're wondering. It's not capable. But you've been in that situation, right? And even if they look right back, it feels like you're not their priority. And even if you can say, I heard what you said, and repeat it back perfectly, you still lose points on that one. So try to actually turn your device off or put it away while you're talking to someone. On Friday, compliment someone from a different political party, and here's the kicker, sincerely. Say a compliment that you can mean. And you can't say something like, your hair is not terrible. That is not a compliment. That does not count. So compliment them sincerely. And on Saturday, send a thank you note to someone who serves your community. You might particularly look for someone who's underappreciated. I don't know about you, I don't really notice that my trash gets picked up once a week until it doesn't. And then I care a lot about that, right? I got all this trash and I need to put it somewhere. And so think about who are the people in your community who serve and yet who are not appreciated, and write them a note to let them know that you notice and you care. And in these small acts of kindness, we're able to embody the kindness of God for all of God's people. All right, let's pray together. God, we thank you that you are kind, no matter how much or how little we seem to deserve it. And you give your kindness to everyone, even the people that we would rather you didn't. And so, God, help us to become kind like you. Help us to bear that fruit of your Spirit. God, grow it in our hearts and in our lives. And help us to act in ways that are kind, that let people know that they are loved by you. We thank you for Jesus, for the way that he embodied your kindness in everything that he did, and that in his final act of kindness that he gave himself for us. We thank you that he taught us even how to pray, saying, Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory forever. Amen.